The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Natalie Kensington forward against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering as dust billowed through the window like a prairie storm in 1876 Wyoming territory. She pressed her gloved hand against the window, peering out at the ramshackle collection of buildings that could barely be called a town. This was not paradise. The sign nailed crookedly to a weathered post read "Redemption" in faded letters, and her stomach dropped like a stone into a well. She had been corresponding with Harold Winters in Paradise, Wyoming for 6 months, carefully crafting letters that spoke of hope and new beginnings. Paradise was supposed to be a thriving mining town with a proper church and school. This place looked like it had been forgotten by God and everyone else. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as gravel. Natalie gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned, her fingers trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. At 22 years old, she had left Philadelphia with nothing but determination and the promise of marriage to a man she had never met. Her father's gambling debts had destroyed their family's reputation, and her mother's death last winter had left her with no other options. Mail-order bride advertisements had seemed like a lifeline, a chance to start fresh somewhere. The Kensington name meant nothing. She stepped down from the coach, her burgundy traveling dress immediately collecting dust. The street was nearly empty, just a few buildings lining either side. A saloon with broken shutters, a general store that looked barely functional, what might have been a smithy, and a handful of other structures in various states of disrepair. "Excuse me," she called to the driver as he unloaded her trunk. "Are you certain this is the correct stop? I was meant to arrive in Paradise." The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Paradise is 40 miles north, miss. This here is Redemption. Stage does not go to Paradise." "You would have needed to arrange private transport from here." Her breath caught in her throat. "But my letter specified Paradise clearly. My intended Mr. Winters was supposed to meet me there. Well, he is not here, and I have got a schedule to keep." The driver climbed back onto his perch. "Town has a boarding house of sorts. Good luck to you." Before she could protest further, the stagecoach rattled away, leaving her standing alone on the dusty street with her belongings and growing panic. She had exactly $3.40 to her name. Not nearly enough for private transport to Paradise, and certainly not enough to return to Philadelphia even if she had anywhere to go back to. The sun beat down mercilessly as she tried to formulate a plan. She could write to Mr. Winters, but that would take days, perhaps weeks. She needed shelter and food before then. Her pride bristled at the thought of charity, but practicality won out. She would need to find work, at least temporarily. She was dragging her trunk toward the general store when a man emerged from the building next to the smithy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a dusty Stetson. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore work-worn denims and a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression shifting from surprise to something she could not quite identify. "You look lost," he said, his voice a warm baritone that seemed to rumble from somewhere deep in his chest. "I am meant to be in Paradise," Natalie said, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "The stagecoach driver informed me this is Redemption, and that I would need private transport to reach my destination." The man's storm-gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after 2 weeks of travel. "Paradise is a hard ride from here. You have family waiting, my intended," she said, lifting her chin. "Mr. Harold Winters, we are to be married." Something flickered across the man's face, gone too quickly to interpret. He stepped closer, and she noticed he moved with a fluid grace unusual for someone so solidly built. "I am Ryder Kincaid. I run the ranch outside town, such as it is, and you are Miss Natalie Kensington of Philadelphia." The words sounded absurdly formal in this rough place. "Well, Miss Kensington of Philadelphia, I know Harold Winters. He is a snake oil salesman who moves from town to town separating fools from their money. If he told you he is a prosperous gentleman in paradise, he lied." The words hit her like a physical blow. "That cannot be true. We have been corresponding for months. He sent me money for the journey. He described his home, his business interests." Ryder's expression softened slightly. "How much money did he send?" "Enough for the stage coach fare and a few necessities." "And how much did you send him over these months of correspondence?" Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. She had sent him $50 total, money scraped together from selling her mother's jewelry and her own meager possessions. She had thought it was for wedding preparations, for setting up their household. The realization of her foolishness crashed over her like a cold wave. "I see you are beginning to understand," Ryder said, not unkindly. "You are not the first woman he has done this to. There was another girl last year. She had the sense to turn around and go home when she discovered the truth. I have no home to return to." The admission escaped before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted the vulnerability it revealed. Ryder studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Finally, he said, "You are in the right place now. I beg your pardon. Redemption might not look like much, but it is honest. No false promises here, just hard work and straight dealing. And as it happens, I need help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter in Cheyenne. The place is falling apart without someone to manage the household. I can offer room, board, and wages. $30 a month." Natalie's mind raced. It was not the future she had envisioned, but it was something. A foothold, a chance to catch her breath and figure out what came next. Still, propriety demanded she ask, "Would it be appropriate, Mr. Kincaid?" An unmarried woman living at her ranch with an unmarried man. "I have 3 ranch hands who bunk in the separate quarters. They would serve as chaperones of sorts. And Mrs. Chen, who runs the general store here in town, she will vouch that I am not a scoundrel. I am simply a man who needs help running a household and can pay fair wages for honest work." It was not much of a reassurance, but what choice did she have? She could try to find work in this dying town, but the prospects looked bleak. At least at her ranch, there would be food and shelter while she earned money. Perhaps enough to eventually make her way somewhere else, somewhere she could start over properly. "I would need to meet these ranch hands and see the accommodations before I agree to anything," she said. For the first time, Ryder smiled, and it transformed his stern features into something almost handsome. "That sounds like good sense. Let me help you with your trunk. We can stop by the general store first so Mrs. Chen can tell you I am not planning to murder you in your sleep." Despite everything, Natalie found herself almost smiling at his dry humor. She followed him toward the general store, watching as he hefted her heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing. The general store was dim and cluttered, shelves stocked with a hodgepodge of goods. A small Chinese woman stood behind the counter, her dark eyes sharp and assessing as they entered. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Natalie Kensington from Philadelphia. She was meant for paradise but ended up here instead. I have offered her the housekeeping position at my ranch, but she sensibly wants a character reference before agreeing." Mrs. Chen's expression softened as she looked at Natalie. "Another girl fooled by Harold Winters, so it seems," Natalie admitted. "Ryder Kincaid is a good man, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Honest, hardworking, treats people fair regardless of where they come from. She gestured to herself meaningfully, and Natalie understood. In a rough frontier town, a Chinese woman running a successful business spoke volumes about the character of the community that allowed it. He pays his debts on time, does not drink to excess, and I have never heard him speak ill of anyone who did not deserve it. You could do much worse than working for him. I appreciate your candor, Natalie said. The ranch is 3 miles out, Ryder said. I have my wagon here in town. We can be there before dark if we leave soon. You can see the place, meet the hands, and make your decision. If you would rather stay in town, Mrs. Chen rents rooms above the store. $5 a week, Mrs. Chen said. But if you are smart, you will take the ranch job. $30 a month is generous, and Ryder needs the help. That man could not cook a decent meal if his life depended on it. Ryder did not deny it. It is true. I have been living on burned beans and jerky for weeks. Natalie made her decision. I would like to see the ranch, Mr. Kincaid. Call me Ryder. If you are going to be working for me, we can dispense with excessive formality. The wagon ride out of town revealed the stark beauty of Wyoming territory. Rolling plains stretched endlessly, interrupted by distant mountains that rose like cathedral spires against the brilliant blue sky. The grass rippled in the wind like water, and the air smelled of sage and earth. Despite her circumstances, Natalie felt something loosen in her chest. Philadelphia had been all narrow streets and coal smoke, pressing crowds and whispered scandals. This wild openness was frightening, but also strangely liberating. How long have you had the ranch? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. 5 years. I bought it from a family heading back east after the husband died. Started with nothing but the land and a half-collapsed barn. Built it up slowly. I run cattle mostly, some horses. It is not a grand operation, but it is mine. There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from creating something with your own hands. You run it alone. I have 3 hands. Tommy is 17, been with me for 2 years. Good kid, hard worker. Then there is Miguel and his brother Carlos. They came up from Texas 3 years ago looking for work. Best horse breakers I have ever seen. They are good men, all of them. You will be safe there. The repeated assurance of her safety should have been comforting, but instead it reminded her how precarious her situation was. She was traveling into the wilderness with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago, based on nothing but the word of a shopkeeper and her own desperate need. As if sensing her thoughts, Ryder said, I know you have no reason to trust me. But I give you my word, Miss Kensington, you will come to no harm on my watch. If you want to leave at any time, I will personally drive you back to town or anywhere else you need to go. No questions asked. His sincerity was evident in every word, and Natalie felt some of her tension ease. I appreciate that, Ryder, and please, call me Natalie. As you said, excessive formality seems unnecessary under the circumstances. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. It was larger than she had expected. A sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn in good repair, several outbuildings and extensive corrals where horses moved restlessly. It was rough-hewn but well-maintained, speaking of care and attention despite Ryder's claims of domestic chaos. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached. The youngest, who must be Tommy, was lanky and sunburned with an eager expression. The other 2 were clearly brothers, both dark-haired and compact, with the easy posture of men comfortable in their own skin. Boys, this is Miss Natalie Kensington. She is considering taking over as housekeeper. Natalie, this is Tommy, Miguel, and Carlos. All 3 removed their hats respectfully. Tommy's eyes widened with something like awe. "Madam, if you can cook anything besides what Ryder makes, you will be a blessing from heaven." "Tommy," Ryder said warningly, but Natalie laughed. "I am a competent cook, though I confess my experience is primarily with Eastern cuisine. I may need to adapt to what is available here. We have plenty of beef, some chickens for eggs, a vegetable garden that is more weeds than vegetables at this point," Ryder said, helping her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Chen can supply basics like flour and sugar. It is not fancy, but we will not starve." The inside of the house was indeed in need of a woman's touch. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and furniture that was functional but sparse. Dust coated every surface, and dishes were piled in a wash basin. A staircase led to the second floor. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Ryder said, looking slightly embarrassed at the state of things. "The largest is mine, but the other 2 are good-sized. You could take your pick. There is a washroom with a pump for water. The hands bunk in the building behind the barn. You would have privacy up here." Natalie walked through the space, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. It was overwhelming, but also oddly appealing. This was a problem she could solve with work and time, unlike the tangled mess her life had become. "I would need to establish some rules," she said, turning to face Ryder, "about propriety and expectations. Of course, whatever you need. I would want a lock on my bedroom door. And I would expect all the men to knock before entering the house, giving me time to prepare if I am in a state of undress or otherwise occupied." "More than reasonable. I will install a lock today, and the knocking rule makes sense. Anything else, my time off. 1 full day a week where I am not expected to work. Sunday. We do not do ranch work on Sundays beyond the essential care of the animals. The town has a small church. Mrs. Chen leads services when the circuit preacher is not around. You would be welcome to attend or spend the day however you choose." Natalie nodded slowly. "Then I accept your offer, Ryder. I will work as your housekeeper for $30 a month, room and board included." Relief washed across his face. "Thank you, truly. You cannot know what a difference this will make." That first evening, Natalie insisted on cooking supper despite her exhaustion from travel. She found the ingredients for a simple stew, supplementing the beef with vegetables from the sadly neglected garden. It was basic fare, but the men acted as though she had prepared a feast. Their genuine appreciation was touching, so different from the stiff formality of Philadelphia dinner parties where every dish was judged and criticized. As she lay in bed that night, her new room clean and the door securely locked, Natalie reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west to marry a man she did not know, seeking escape from scandal and debt. Instead, she had found herself in a dying town, working as a housekeeper for a cowboy. It was not the fresh start she had imagined, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Through the open window, she could hear the distant sound of cattle lowing and the wind moving through the grass. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She had never seen stars like this in Philadelphia. There, the city lights and smoke obscured all but the brightest celestial bodies. Here, the Milky Way stretched overhead in a luminous river. She thought about Ryder's words, "You are in the right place now." At the time, they had seemed like empty comfort. But lying there beneath those impossible stars, Natalie allowed herself to hope he might be right. The days fell into a rhythm. Natalie rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men before they headed out to work. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the long, neglected house. The work was hard and endless, but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. Every improvement was visible and immediate. She could see the results of her labor in clean floors, mended curtains, and organized cupboards. The afternoons she devoted to laundry, mending, and preparing the evening meal. She attacked the vegetable garden with determination, clearing weeds and coaxing the struggling plants back to health. Mrs. Chen provided seeds and advice, and slowly the garden began to revive. The ranch hands were respectful and helpful. Tommy especially seemed eager to assist with any heavy lifting or tasks beyond her strength. Miguel and Carlos were quieter but kind, often leaving small gifts: wildflowers in a jar, a perfectly shaped stone, fresh eggs from the henhouse before she had to collect them herself. But it was Ryder who occupied her thoughts more than she cared to admit. He was unfailingly courteous, always knocking before entering the house, thanking her for every meal and respecting her privacy. Yet she found herself watching for him in the evenings when the work was done and he would sit on the porch, sometimes whittling, sometimes just staring out at the land. 3 weeks into her employment, she joined him there one evening, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "May I sit?" "Please," he said, looking pleased by her company. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Finally, Natalie said, "Tell me about this place, about redemption." Ryder was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "It used to be bigger. 10 years ago, there was a silver mine that employed maybe 50 men. The town grew up to support them, but the mine played out 5 years back, and most folks left. The ones who stayed are here because they do not have anywhere better to go, or because they are too stubborn to admit defeat." "Which are you?" he smiled slightly. "Maybe both. I came here running from something. Figured a dying town in the middle of nowhere was as good a place as any to disappear." "What were you running from?" The question was bold, perhaps too personal, but the gathering darkness made confession easier. "My family. My father had plans for me, plans that involved me taking over his shipping business in Boston, marrying the daughter of his business partner, living a life that was already mapped out before I was old enough to have a say. I tried to fit into that mold, Natalie. I really did. But it was like wearing boots 2 sizes too small. Eventually, something had to give. His honesty deserved her own. I understand that feeling. My father had plans for me too. I was supposed to marry well, restore the family fortunes that he had gambled away. But after my mother died, I could not bear to stay and play that part anymore. The mail-order bride advertisement seemed like a door opening, a chance to be someone other than the scandalous Kensington daughter. Do you regret it, coming west, even though Winters was a fraud?" Natalie considered the question seriously. "A month ago I would have said yes, but now I am not certain. This life is hard, harder than anything I knew in Philadelphia, but it is honest. I know exactly what is expected of me, and I can see the value of my work. There is something liberating in that." "I felt the same way when I first arrived," Ryder said, "like I could finally breathe properly." They talked long into the evening, trading stories of their former lives. Ryder described growing up in Boston society, the suffocating expectations and rigid social codes. Natalie told him about her mother's gentle sadness, her father's increasing desperation, the slow crumbling of respectability. It became a habit, those evening conversations on the porch. Sometimes they talked about serious things, their pasts and hopes for the future. Other times the conversation was lighter, books they had read, places they wanted to see, silly observations about the ranch animals. Natalie found herself laughing more than she had in years. She also began to notice small things about Ryder. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How he was always the first one up in the morning and the last to bed, constantly working to improve the ranch. His unexpected gentleness with the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. The way he listened when she spoke, giving her his full attention as though her words truly mattered. 2 months into her stay, a late summer storm rolled across the plains. Natalie had never experienced weather like it. The sky turned a sickly green, and the wind began to howl with a fury that made the sturdy house groan. Ryder sent the hands to secure the animals and ordered Natalie to stay inside. She watched from the window as rain began to fall in sheets, driven sideways by the wind. Lightning split the sky with terrifying frequency, and thunder shook the walls. She had experienced storms in Philadelphia, but nothing like this raw display of nature's power. A tremendous crack made her jump. Through the rain-blurred window, she saw that a large tree branch had fallen across the corral fence. The horses were panicking, threatening to break through the damaged section. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and ran outside. The rain soaked her instantly, cold and stinging. She could barely see through the deluge, but she could hear the horses screaming in fear. She stumbled toward the corral, knowing she needed to calm them before they hurt themselves or escaped. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. Ryder's face was inches from hers, his expression fierce. "What are you doing out here? Get back inside. The horses are terrified. They will break through the fence. I will handle it. You need to get to safety. I can help." For a moment, they stood frozen, staring at each other through the rain. Then Ryder cursed under his breath and grabbed her hand. "Stay close to me." Together they approached the corral. The horses were wild-eyed and plunging, but Natalie began speaking to them in the same soothing tones she had heard Ryder use. Slowly, miraculously, they began to calm. Ryder worked quickly to secure the damaged fence with rope, while she kept the horses settled with her voice and gentle hands. By the time they finished, they were both drenched and shivering. Ryder pulled her back toward the house, his hand firm around hers. Inside, he immediately began building up the fire while she stood dripping on the floor, suddenly aware of how her wet dress clung to her body. "You are freezing," Ryder said, his voice rough. "Go change into dry clothes before you catch your death." But Natalie found herself rooted to the spot, staring at him. Water dripped from his hair, and his wet shirt clung to the muscles of his chest and shoulders. There was something in his eyes, an intensity that made her breath catch. "Natalie," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She did not know who moved first. One moment they were standing apart, and the next his hands were framing her face, and her fingers were clutching his wet shirt. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle despite its urgency. Asking a question, she answered by pressing closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I have been hoping you would," she whispered back. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching her face. "This complicates things. I know. You work for me. There is a power imbalance that makes this inappropriate. I know that too." Natalie took a shaky breath. "But I find I do not care about propriety as much as I thought I would." Ryder's thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "I will not take advantage of your situation. If this is going to be something, it has to be because we both choose it freely. Which means you need to understand that you are not obligated to me in any way. You can work here, take your wages, and leave whenever you wish. This, between us, cannot be a condition of your employment." His insistence on her autonomy, on making sure she knew she had choices, made her fall a little bit in love with him right then. "I understand, and I appreciate you saying that. But Ryder, I am not kissing you because I work for you or because I feel obligated. I am kissing you because I want to." This time when their lips met, it was slower, deeper, a thorough exploration that left them both shaken. When they finally separated, Ryder said, "You should still go change into dry clothes, and I need to check on the hands, make sure everyone weathered the storm safely." Natalie nodded, stepping back reluctantly. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Everything had changed in the space of a few minutes, and she had no idea what came next. But for once, the uncertainty felt thrilling rather than terrifying. The next morning brought an awkwardness neither of them had anticipated. Ryder came to breakfast looking like he had not slept, and Natalie felt shy in a way she had not experienced since she was a girl. They moved around each other carefully, overly polite, until finally Miguel said, "Did something happen we should know about?" "The storm damaged the north fence," Ryder said quickly. "We need to repair it today." Tommy grinned. "That is not what he meant, boss." Ryder shot him a quelling look, and the conversation moved on, but Natalie could feel the ranch hands watching them with knowing amusement. Over the following weeks, she and Ryder navigated their new relationship carefully. He courted her properly, as though they were respectable people in a normal town, rather than two scarred souls in the middle of nowhere. He brought her wildflowers and interesting stones. He taught her to ride, his hands steadying her until she found her balance. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. But they were also practical people who had both learned that life rarely followed the proper script. Their kisses grew more heated, stolen moments of passion that left them breathless. Yet Ryder always pulled back before things went too far, his respect for her reputation ironclad despite the isolation of the ranch. "Marry me," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The proposal was sudden, without preamble or pretty speech, but it was perfectly Ryder. Natalie turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "What? Marry me," he repeated, taking her hand. "I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I cannot imagine my life without you now. You have turned this house into a home. You have made me remember what it feels like to want a future instead of just surviving day to day. I love you, Natalie. I think I have loved you since you stood in that dusty street in your fine Philadelphia dress, looking lost and brave and determined not to show how frightened you were." Tears pricked her eyes. "I love you too, so much that it scares me sometimes." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," she laughed through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a joy that made her feel light as air. When they finally separated, he said, "We should do it soon. Mrs. Chen mentioned the circuit preacher is due in 2 weeks. We could marry then, make it proper." 2 weeks sounds perfect. They were married on a crisp October morning in 1876 in Mrs. Chen's general store, since Redemption lacked a proper church building. The ceremony was simple and brief, but Natalie felt the weight of the vows down to her bones. When Ryder slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she thought about the elaborate wedding her father had planned for her back in Philadelphia, the society event that would have restored their family's standing. That wedding would have been all appearances and expectations, a performance rather than a promise. This wedding, in a rough frontier town with only a handful of witnesses, felt more real than anything she had experienced in her former life. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Ryder kissed her, it was not for show or propriety. It was a claim and a promise, the beginning of a life they would build together. Mrs. Chen had prepared a small celebration, and the ranch hands had cleaned up the house and decorated it with fall wildflowers. It was not fancy, but it was filled with genuine affection and joy. Tommy gave a rambling toast that made everyone laugh. Miguel and Carlos presented them with a beautiful hand-tooled leather saddle they had made together, designed specifically for Natalie. As the sun set, and their guests departed back to their own homes and bunks, Ryder carried Natalie over the threshold of their home. She laughed at the traditional gesture, but also felt moved by his determination to honor every ritual he could, to give her a proper wedding despite their circumstances. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other without the barriers that had kept them apart. Ryder was gentle and patient, aware that despite her age she was innocent in the ways of physical love. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, murmuring words of love and desire until she was trembling beneath him. When he finally made her his wife in truth, there was a moment of pain that gave way to something deeper, a connection that went beyond the physical. They moved together in the darkness, learning each other's rhythms, building toward a peak that left them both shaken and complete. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Natalie felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Thank you for getting on the wrong stage, coach," she laughed softly. "Thank you for telling me I was in the right place." The winter that followed was hard, as Wyoming winters were. Snow piled high around the ranch, and the temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. But inside their home, Natalie and Ryder built a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. They learned each other's habits and preferences. Natalie discovered that Ryder liked to read late into the night, working his way through the small collection of books he had brought from Boston. He learned that she sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. They developed private jokes and shared looks, the intimate language of married couples. The physical side of their marriage deepened as well. Ryder taught her that passion could be playful as well as intense, that laughter belonged in the bedroom as much as sighs. She grew bold in expressing her own desires, learning what brought him pleasure, reveling in her power to make him lose control. By spring, Natalie realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, anxiety. She told Ryder one evening after supper, simply and directly. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are," she confirmed, feeling her own joy expand to match his. He set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "You should sit down. Should you be on your feet so much, we need to get you to a doctor." She laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Ryder. I am not made of glass." But she also felt touched by his concern. He became impossibly attentive throughout her pregnancy, trying to do all the heavy work and constantly checking if she needed anything. It was endearing, if occasionally suffocating. Mrs. Chen became an invaluable resource, having helped with many births over the years. She provided advice, herbal remedies for morning sickness, and the comforting presence of female wisdom. Natalie had never had many female friends in Philadelphia, where every woman was a potential rival in the marriage market. Mrs. Chen's straightforward kindness was a revelation. As summer arrived and Natalie's belly swelled, she found herself thinking about her mother, wishing desperately that she could be there to meet her grandchild. But she also felt her mother's presence in the lessons she had passed on, the songs she had taught, the values she had instilled. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon in 1877. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie was certain she would die. But Mrs. Chen was calm and capable, and Ryder held her hand through every contraction, his face pale but his grip steady. When the baby finally emerged, wailing lustily, Mrs. Chen announced, "You have a son." A son. Natalie reached for the baby and Mrs. Chen placed him in her arms. He was red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Ryder leaned over them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He is," Natalie agreed, though objectively the baby looked like a wrinkled, angry little creature. But he was theirs, created from their love, and he was the most precious thing she had ever seen. They named him James after Natalie's grandfather. Baby James was a healthy, demanding infant who kept them both awake most nights. But even in the exhaustion, Natalie felt a completeness she had never imagined. Her family had been broken, scattered by debt and death and scandal. But here, in this rough frontier home, she had built something new. A family of her own choosing, bound by love rather than obligation. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Ryder's careful management and hard work were paying off. They acquired more cattle and horses, expanded the grazing land, and made improvements to the buildings. It was not a grand operation by any measure, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and sustained by their joint efforts. When James was 2 years old, Natalie became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because Mrs. Chen's remedies were more effective the second time. She gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1880, a tiny thing with Ryder's gray eyes and Natalie's dark hair. They named her Catherine, after Ryder's mother. Holding her daughter, Natalie thought about the life she might have lived in Philadelphia. She would have married some society gentleman her father chose, produced heirs in sterile duty, and lived out her days in quiet desperation. She would never have known this fierce, consuming love for her husband and children. She would never have discovered her own strength or built something with her own hands. The years passed with the particular speed and slowness of parenthood. Days could feel endless when dealing with crying babies and endless chores, but months and years seemed to slip by like water. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed Ryder everywhere, learning ranching from his father. Catherine was bright and curious, forever asking questions and exploring everything. Redemption changed slowly around them. A few new families moved in, drawn by cheap land and the promise of a fresh start. The town was never going to be a booming metropolis, but it stabilized into a small, tight-knit community. A proper church was built, and a small schoolhouse opened when enough children lived in the area to warrant it. Natalie became a pillar of the community, helping organize church socials and teaching children to read. She never forgot that she had arrived here as a desperate mail-order bride bound for the wrong town. That experience made her compassionate toward others who were struggling or lost. When another young woman showed up in Redemption in 1883, also a mail-order bride who had been deceived by Harold Winters, Natalie welcomed her with open arms. She helped the girl, Sarah, find work and navigate the challenges of frontier life. Eventually, Sarah married Tommy, who was now a competent rancher in his own right, managing part of Ryder's expanding operation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Natalie on a picnic to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. They sat together watching their land stretch out below them, their children playing nearby with the easy confidence of those who knew they belonged. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked, echoing the question from their early days. "The life you gave up in Philadelphia?" Natalie leaned against his shoulder, fitting perfectly into his side as she always had. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to live. I just had to take the wrong stagecoach to find it." He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her. "I am glad you did. I cannot imagine any of this without you. You are the heart of everything good in my life." She tilted her face up to kiss him properly, a kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their wedding night. Even after 10 years and 2 children, the physical connection between them remained strong. They still sought each other in the night, still found joy and comfort in the marriage bed. "I love you," she said against his lips. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." It was something she said often, a small ritual between them. Ryder smiled and repeated his usual response. "Then I am the luckiest man alive." They stayed there until the sun began to set, watching the sky paint itself in brilliant colors. James called to them, and Catherine came running up the hill, demanding to be lifted and swung around. Ryder obliged, making her shriek with delight while James climbed onto Natalie's lap, still young enough to want his mother's cuddles. Sitting there surrounded by her family, Natalie thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in the wrong town. She had been so certain her life was ruined that she had made a terrible mistake. But that wrong turn had led her here, to this moment, to this life that was harder but infinitely richer than anything she had left behind. The following years brought new challenges and joys. Droughts tested their resilience, and harsh winters took their toll. But the ranch survived and continued to grow. Ryder's reputation for raising quality horses spread, and they began to command good prices at market. In 1885, Natalie gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel. He was a happy, easy baby, so different from James's serious nature and Catherine's fierce curiosity. The house was chaotic and loud, filled with the sounds of children and life. Miguel and Carlos eventually left to start their own ranch, but they remained close friends, visiting often and always welcome at the Kincaid table. New hands were hired as the operation expanded, and Ryder trained them with the same patience and fairness he had shown his first employees. Mrs. Chen grew older but no less sharp, remaining a beloved fixture in Redemption. When she finally passed away in 1890, the entire community mourned. She had been the heart of the town, the person who had welcomed everyone regardless of their background. Natalie wept at her funeral, remembering the kindness Mrs. Chen had shown a frightened young woman who had nowhere else to turn. The children grew rapidly, as children do. James became a skilled horseman, his father's pride. Catherine proved to have a gift for learning and devoured every book she could find. Daniel was the charmer of the family, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile. In 1892, a letter arrived from Boston. Ryder stared at it for a long time before opening it. His father had died, the letter informed him, and had left him a substantial inheritance. The shipping company was being sold, but Ryder's share would amount to a considerable sum. "We could go back," Natalie said softly, reading the letter over his shoulder. "With that money, we could live anywhere. The children could have advantages, education." Ryder was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you want to go back, did she?" Natalie thought about Boston society, about the life she could give her children there. But she also thought about this ranch, this community they had helped build. She thought about the freedom of the wide open spaces, the honesty of hard work, the closeness of a small community where everyone mattered. "No," she said finally, "this is our home. Our children are being raised with values that matter: hard work, kindness, resilience. They are learning to build something with their own hands, to judge people by their character rather than their social standing. That is worth more than any advantage Boston could offer." Relief washed across Ryder's face. "I feel the same way, but we could use the money to make improvements here. Expand the house, maybe start a proper school in town, fund things that will benefit the whole community." They did exactly that. The inheritance allowed them to improve the ranch significantly, adding modern conveniences and expanding the operation. But they also invested in redemption, funding the construction of a larger school and library, helping young families get established, and supporting community initiatives. Their generosity was not flashy or self-aggrandizing. They simply helped where help was needed, remembering what it was like to need a hand up. The community flourished as a result, growing into a place where people wanted to settle and raise families. As the 19th century drew to a close, Natalie sometimes paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She was 45 years old, her dark hair now streaked with silver. Her hands bore the calluses and scars of decades of hard work. Her face showed lines earned by laughter and sun, and the occasional worry. She was nothing like the young Philadelphia socialite who had stepped off that stagecoach 23 years ago. That girl had been fragile, shaped by others' expectations, terrified of making mistakes. The woman she had become was strong, capable, deeply rooted in this place and this life. Ryder had aged too, his dark hair now more gray than not, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. But to Natalie, he was more handsome than ever. The love between them had only deepened with time, tempered by shared struggles and joys into something unbreakable. Their children were nearly grown now. James, at 21, was essentially running the ranch alongside his father. Catherine, at 19, was teaching at the school they had helped build, though Natalie suspected it would not be long before some young man convinced her to marry. Daniel, at 14, was still finding his way, torn between following his brother into ranching and pursuing his own interests in medicine. One evening in the summer of 1899, Natalie and Ryder sat on the porch as they had countless times before. Their hair was gray and their bones occasionally creaked, but they still held hands like young lovers. "I have been thinking," Ryder said, "about that day we met. You standing in the street with your fancy trunk, looking so determined not to cry." Natalie smiled at the memory. "I was terrified. Everything I had planned had fallen apart, and I had nowhere to go." "I knew right then I was in trouble," Ryder admitted. "You were so beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something in your eyes, a strength under the fear. I think I fell in love with you in that moment, though I did not recognize it yet. I thought you were being kind to a foolish woman who had made terrible choices," Natalie said. "You were not foolish. You were brave. You took a chance on a life you could not predict, because staying where you were meant living a lie. That takes courage." She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space that seemed made for her. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Ryder confirmed. "Better than anything I imagined when I ran away from Boston. You gave me everything that matters: love, family, purpose." "You gave me the same," Natalie said. "You gave me a home when I was lost. You saw me, truly saw me, and loved what you saw." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could see James showing Daniel something about horse training. Catherine's laughter drifted from inside the house where she was helping with supper preparations. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Natalie asked. "When I told you I was meant for paradise. I said you were in the right place now. You were correct. This is exactly where I was meant to be." The years continued to pass, bringing the changes that time always brings. James married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Natalie and Ryder their first grandchild in 1901, a little boy they named Ryder. Holding her grandson, Natalie felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. Catherine eventually married as well, to a young lawyer who had moved to Redemption to start a practice. She continued teaching even after marriage, determined to use her mind and education. Natalie could not have been prouder. Daniel pursued his interest in medicine, studying with the local doctor and eventually traveling to Denver for formal training. He returned to Redemption to practice, serving the community with the same dedication his parents had shown. As grandchildren multiplied and the 20th century progressed, Natalie and Ryder gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch. James had proved more than capable, and they were content to advise when asked and spend time with their growing brood of grandchildren. On a warm spring day in 1915, Natalie was working in her garden, now extensive and productive thanks to decades of patient cultivation. She had learned to grow vegetables that thrived in Wyoming's challenging climate, and her garden fed not just her family but much of the community. Ryder found her there among the emerging plants, her hands in the soil, her face peaceful. He stood watching her for a moment, marveling as he often did that she had chosen to build this life with him. She looked up and smiled, the expression transforming her lined face into something radiant. "Come help me with these tomato steaks." He joined her in the garden, and they worked together in companionable silence. They had been married for nearly 40 years, and they could communicate with looks and small gestures as easily as words. That evening, their children and grandchildren gathered for supper, a weekly tradition that filled the house with noise and chaos and love. Natalie looked around the table at the faces of those she loved most, the family she and Ryder had created together, and felt a satisfaction that went soul deep. After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Ryder drew Natalie into his arms. Even now, after all these years, his touch could make her pulse quicken. "Dance with me," he said, though there was no music. She laughed but allowed him to lead her in a slow waltz around the living room. His hand was warm on her waist, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Every day for nearly 40 years, and I love you more each one." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me in that dusty street and deciding to take a chance on a lost Philadelphia girl. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense." They swayed together in the lamplight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life richer than either had imagined possible. The seasons turned as they always did. Summer gave way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring. The cycle repeated year after year, marked by births and deaths, harvests and hardships, joys and sorrows. Through it all, Natalie and Ryder remained constants for each other, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1920, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party that brought together the entire community. Redemption had grown into a proper town now, with paved streets and electric lights, automobiles and telephones. The world had changed dramatically since that day in 1876, when Natalie had stepped off the stagecoach into the wrong town. But some things remained constant. The land still stretched endlessly under the vast Wyoming sky. Hard work was still valued over inherited privilege. Community still mattered more than individual ambition. And love, real love built on respect and partnership and genuine affection, was still the greatest treasure anyone could possess. As Natalie and Ryder stood before their assembled friends and family, their hands clasped together, Natalie reflected on the improbable journey that had brought them to this moment. She had set out to marry a stranger for security and escape. Instead, she had found her soulmate, her partner, her home. "Speech?" Someone called, and the crowd took up the chant. Ryder looked at Natalie, and she nodded. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice still strong despite his years. 45 years ago, a beautiful woman got off the stagecoach in Redemption by mistake. I took one look at her and told her she was in the right place now. At the time, I was just trying to help someone in need, but those words turned out to be prophetic. She was in the right place. And her arrival put me in the right place too. Everything good in my life stems from that moment. So here is to wrong turns that lead us exactly where we need to be. And here is to the love of my life, who has made every day an adventure and a blessing. The crowd cheered, and Natalie felt tears slip down her cheeks. She stood on her toes to kiss him, not caring that everyone was watching. Let them see. Let them witness the love that had sustained them through 4.5 decades. That night, alone in their bedroom, they held each other close. Their bodies were old now, marked by time and hard use, but the passion between them had never died. They made love slowly, gently, with the practiced ease of long familiarity and the tenderness of deep devotion. Afterward, Natalie traced the lines of Ryder's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. She memorized him as she had done countless times before, storing away every detail. "No regrets?" he asked softly, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," she answered, as she always did. "You are my home, Ryder Kincaid. Wherever you are is where I belong." "And you are mine," he replied, pulling her closer. "My unexpected gift, my mail-order bride who arrived in the wrong town and changed my entire world." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms as they had done for 45 years. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The ranch that they had built together stood solid and strong, a testament to hard work and dedication. Their children and grandchildren slept peacefully, secure in the love and stability that Natalie and Ryder had created. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes of time. Ryder's health began to fail in his 70s, his body finally succumbing to decades of hard physical labor. Natalie nursed him with fierce devotion, determined to give him the same strength he had given her for so many years. On a quiet morning in 1925, with Natalie holding his hand and their children gathered around, Ryder passed away peacefully in the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. His last words were, "I love you. Right place, right time, right woman." Natalie's grief was profound, a physical ache that made breathing difficult. Half a century together, and she had to learn how to exist without him. But she was not alone. Her children surrounded her with love and support, and her grandchildren provided distraction and purpose. She continued living at the ranch, now run entirely by James and his sons. She tended her garden and told stories to the great-grandchildren who began appearing with delightful regularity. She attended church services and community gatherings, remaining active and engaged with life. But in the quiet moments, she missed Ryder with an intensity that never faded. She missed his voice and his touch, his steady presence and quiet humor. She missed the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. She missed growing old together, the shared rhythm of their days. One evening, sitting on the porch that had witnessed so many important moments, Natalie reflected on the life she had lived. She was 87 years old, a great-great-grandmother many times over. She had seen the turn of 2 centuries and witnessed changes that would have seemed like magic to her younger self. But what she was proudest of, what mattered most, was the love she had shared with Ryder and the family they had created together. They had built something lasting and good, a legacy of love and hard work and community service. As the sun set in familiar glory, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Natalie smiled. She could almost feel Ryder sitting beside her, his hand warm in hers. "You were right," she whispered to the wind. "I was in the right place all along." Natalie Kincaid passed away peacefully in her sleep on a summer night in 1929, surrounded by the family she loved. She was laid to rest beside Ryder on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and a single inscription: "Together, always." The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations of Kincaids. The story of how it all began became family legend. The mail-order bride who arrived in the wrong town, and the cowboy who saw that she was exactly where she needed to be. It was told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination, and that true love can be found in the most unexpected places. Years later, when Redemption celebrated its centennial, someone proposed naming the main street after Natalie and Ryder Kincaid, the couple who had done so much to build and sustain the community. The proposal passed unanimously, and Kincaid Street became the heart of town, a lasting tribute to two people who had loved each other well and built a legacy that endured long after they were gone. Their story became more than family legend. It became part of the town's identity, a founding myth that spoke to the values Redemption held dear: hard work, honest dealing, compassion for strangers, and the transformative power of love. School children learned about them. Historians documented their lives. But more importantly, their descendants carried forward the lessons they had taught through their example. The ranch itself became a historical landmark, preserved and maintained by the family. Visitors could tour the house where Natalie had first worked as a housekeeper and later raised her children. They could see the porch where she and Ryder had spent countless evenings in conversation. They could walk through the garden she had cultivated for decades, still producing vegetables thanks to the care of her descendants. But beyond the physical legacy, beyond the land and buildings and historical markers, Natalie and Ryder's true gift was the example of their love. In a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, they had found each other and built something beautiful. They had proved that it was possible to overcome mistakes and misfortunes, to take wrong turns and still end up exactly where you belonged. Their story reminded people that love was not about perfection or grand gestures. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, choosing each other again and again. It was about building a life together through good times and hard, supporting each other's dreams, and creating a home where love could flourish. And it all started because a frightened young woman got on the wrong stagecoach, and a lonely cowboy saw past her fine clothes and cultured accent to the strength and courage underneath. It started with a simple statement that turned out to be profound truth: "You are in the right place now." Those words echoed through generations, a reminder that sometimes getting lost is the only way to truly find yourself. Sometimes the wrong town is actually the right one. Sometimes a mistake is actually fate disguising itself. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the person you meet on your worst day becomes the love of your life, the partner who transforms everything, the home you have been searching for all along. Natalie and Ryder's love story became timeless precisely because it was so human. They were not perfect people living a fairy tale. They were flawed, scarred individuals who had made mistakes and suffered losses. But they found each other in that dusty Wyoming town, and they built something that lasted. They created a love that sustained them through nearly 50 years of marriage, and continued to inspire long after they were both gone. Their descendants carried that legacy forward, understanding that the greatest inheritance they received was not land or money, but the example of how to love well. How to build a partnership based on respect and genuine affection. How to weather storms together and come out stronger. how to create a home that was a refuge and a launching pad, a place of safety and growth. The Kincaid family continued to thrive, generation after generation, rooted in the Wyoming soil that Natalie and Ryder had tended so carefully. They remained stewards of the land and pillars of the community, honoring the values their ancestors had established. But more than that, they honored the love story that had started it all, the improbable romance between a displaced Philadelphia socialite and a runaway Boston cowboy who found each other against all odds. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, it was easy to imagine two figures sitting on an old porch, hands clasped together, watching their legacy unfold. Easy to imagine Ryder looking at Natalie with eyes full of love, and Natalie smiling back with the knowledge that she had indeed ended up exactly where she belonged. The wrong town had been the right place all along. The mistake had been the miracle. And the cowboy's simple words had contained a truth deeper than either of them could have known in that moment. She was in the right place, not because of geography, but because she had found her home in him and he had found his in her. That was the real story, the one that mattered most. Not the hardships they faced or the success they achieved, but the love they shared and the life they built together. A love that started with a wrong turn and a helping hand. A love that grew through shared work and evening conversations. A love that deepened into partnership and passion and profound companionship. A love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. A love that proved, once and for all, that sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never plan to reach. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with getting lost. And sometimes, just sometimes, arriving in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong plan leads us exactly where we were always meant to be.